Good morning. Okay.
Good morning.
Yeah. Let's review where we're holding.
All right.
Okay. We have machlokes here between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva. That was essentially yesterday's daf. Let's try with Rabbi Shmuel first. So Rabbi Shmuel points out. 1 second. According to Rabbi Shmuel, a kohen gadol cannot. A kohen gadol becomes tamei to a meis mitzvah because it says la'aviv u'le'imai. A kohen gadol we know is anyways prohibited. When the Torah says that a kohen gadol is prohibited to become tamei, I know obviously that it means he's prohibited to what a kohen headed could become tamei to. In other words, a regular kohen becomes tamei to 7 relatives. Kohen gadol doesn't even become tamei to that. So when the Torah says la'aviv u'le'imai, I know that la'aviv u'le'imai means la'aviv means meis mitzvah. His mother le'imai means that we compare it to Nazir with regard to other tumas. In other words, the only type of tumah that a kohen gadol is prohibited is tumas meis, and not tumah yetz menagof. A kohen gadol is allowed to become tamei to a mitzvah, to a zav, and nida yeladas. Okay. According to Rabbi Shmuel, when it comes to Nazir, what's the source of Nazir? So the truth is, it says al nefesh meis le'yavai. Sorry, al kol nafshis meis le'yavai. Al kol nafshis meis le'yavai. What does that mean? So al kol nafshis meis first of all tells you that a Nazir can't become tamei specifically to human beings because we call it a nefesh meis, even though nefesh itself is a word that's associated with, could be associated with animals. But because it says nefesh meis, meis is certainly not associated with animals. With animals, we call it a nevela. Okay. So the prohibition of Nazir, Akol Nafshis Meis Le'Yaveh tells me that the prohibition of Nazir becoming tamei is only to human beings. According to Rabbi Shmuel, Le'Yaveh also means it has to be a tumah that is possible to get without touching, meaning through which is tumas meis, basically. Okay, 1 second. Okay, now. Okay, the Gemara initially wanted to say that la'aviv u'le'imai is extra by Nazir because a Nazir could be compared to kohen gadol. The Gemara says it's not a proof because Nazir could also be compared to kohen hedyot. Maybe he could become tamei to a father and a mother. So the Gemara resolves that the truth is that the way I know that a Nazir is compared to a kohen gadol is in the fact that the Torah actually says la'aviv, that he's prohibited to become tamei to his father, just like a kohen gadol. Le'imai is for the Gzera Shavah, to compare kohen gadol to kohen hedyot. And 1 second. La'achiv tells me meis mitzvah, and la'achaisai tells me that a meis mitzvah pushes away the mitzvah of korban pesach and milah. Okay, let's do it again, quickly. Again, according to Rabbi Shmuel, kohen gadol, it does not need to say la'aviv u'le'imai, because I know that a kohen gadol is prohibited with whatever kohen hedyot is permitted. So what does Torah say la'aviv u'le'imai? La'aviv meis mitzvah, le'imai, that the type of tumah is only tumas meis, and not zav and nida yeladas mitzvah. With regard to Nazir, the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael is that we're unsure whether to compare Nazir to. The first pasuk tells me that Nazir is only a type of tumas meis of a human tumah, not the tumah nevela of a kosher animal that wasn't slaughtered. Okay, now that's what we know from Kol Nefesh Meis Le'Yavai. Now, how do we know whether a kohen is similar to a nazir is similar to kohen gadol or kohen hedit? That's because it says la'aviv. We know he can't become tamei to his father. We know he has the same din as a kohen gadol. Le'imai compares it to kohen gadol. In other words, that it's a tumah, specifically tumas mace, not any other type of tumah. La'achiv tells me mace mitzvah. La'achayse tells me that even Pesach and Milah are also pushed away by mace mitzvah. Okay. That's all Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Kiva is as follows. Now, according to Rabbi Shmuel, al nefesh meis layavai is just telling you that we're talking about human beings. Rabbi Kiva does not have any presumption that we're not talking about human beings. So al nefesh meis layavai itself is extra. So what does he say? Akol nafshis meis layavai. Nafshis means distant relatives. Meis means close relatives. So we know that a kohen gadol is prohibited like a nazir is prohibited like a kohen gadol. Called nafshis meis tells me close and distant people, they're both prohibited. So what does la'avul ima tell me? La'avul ima tells me meis mitzvah. La'achiv tells me that even a kohen gadol who's also a nazir also has a mitzvah of meis mitzvah. And la'achaisai is korban pesach and milah. Okay. So now we're at the top of Mem Testament Aleph. According to Rabbi Kiva, let's examine the opinion of Rabbi Kiva. Whether somebody is a kohen gadol or he's a kohen gadol and a nazir, nafka mi la'achiv. The top of Mem Testament Aleph, 49a.
Okay.
Whether kohen gadol is a nazir or whether he's not a nazir, he becomes tamei to a meis mitzvah, and that could be learned from the laws of nazir. Because if I know that a nazir who's also a kohen gadol becomes tamei to a meis mitzvah, I know in effect that a kohen gadol also becomes tamei to a meis mitzvah. If that's the case, then what does Rabbi Kiva do with the aviv and imai of kohen gadol? In other words, if I know that kohen gadol becomes tamei to a meis mitzvah, what does the aviv and imai tell me? Why does the Torah specify Aviv and Imai by Kohen Gadol? La'aviv Imai lamalis, and where it says tzrichi, it's necessary. Ikas of Aviv havamina. Okay, so in other words, what he says is that the Torah needs to say Aviv and Imai with regard to Kohen Gadol. I would say that even though a Kohen Gadol is prohibited to become tamei to whatever Kohen Heditz becomes tamei to, but maybe a father and mother are different. And if even if it would have just said one of them, I would say that each one has its own reason why you become tamei to one but not the other. I'll explain. The ikas of Aviv would have just said a father, havamina hainu time mitmala lay. I would think the reason why you can't become tamei to your father mishum chazaka ba'almahu, because nobody knows who their father is. It's only a presumption, so to speak. Aval ima diadina dialaditiyah, but a mother that we know that she gave birth to him. Litmala, so maybe he can become tamei to his mother. And let's say the opposite. If it would have just said a mother, because the family lineage does not pass through the mother, therefore you don't become tamei to your mother. Since we learned that lineage goes through the father, right? A kohen is determined by who his father is, not by who his mother is. Then litmala, he should become tamei to her. She should become tamei to her. I'm sorry, 1 second. I'm sorry, litmala, he should become tamei to him. Kamash malan, that's why the Torah needs to say la'aviv imai, that you become tamei not to any of the relatives and neither to the father or the mother.
This one has to take it for what it says, but it's just hard to understand how the superfluous terms give you this information.
Yeah, it's not. It's well, in this case, Av and Ima is sort of a direct derivation,
yeah.
Although some of the other ones are clearly not. Yeah. Okay. That one's okay. Gemara says, "Well, Rabbi Kiva, akol nafshis meis liyavei lamali." Again, so according to Rabbi Shmuel, we know that by a Nazir, the Torah says he can't become tummy. Well, maybe can't become tummy even to an animal that's in a vela. How do we know we're talking about specifically tumas meis of human beings? It says I'll call nefesh meis liyavei. But according to Rabbi Kiva, what does he do with that? Lamali. 1 second.
Page position, please.
We're on the last line of 49a. I'm sorry. This is with regard to Kohen Gadol. That makes more sense. Okay. In other words, now that we're saying that according to Rabbi Kiva, Kohen Gadol, Torah needs to say la'av v'limai because we need to know that you can't become tummy to a father and mother. Now, according to Rabbi Yishmael, we knew that from the fact that the Torah says whatever Kohen Hedyot is permitted in, Kohen Gadol is prohibited, because the Torah says "Akol nefesh meis liyavei." What exactly is Torah? In other words, Kohen Gadol is not allowed to become tummy to anybody. What does that mean? Does it mean the relatives or the non-relatives? Well, hold on a second. If a Kohen Hedyot can't become tummy to non-relatives, certainly Kohen Gadol can't become tummy. So therefore, Akol nefesh meis liyavei, according to Rabbi Shmuel, indicated to us that you can't become tummy to any of the relatives. So now that we have Akol nefesh meis liyavei, now that we know, according to Rabbi Kiva, that we're saying the source that a Kohen Gadol can't become tummy is from la'av v'limai, and it needs to say both because each one, I presume, not without the other one. If it would have just said a father, I would say you can't become tummy to a father because you don't know it's his father. Or if it would have just said a mother, Torah had to say both. But now that I know the Torah is referring to all relatives, then why does the Torah need to say Akol nefesh meis liyavei? I already know that from a Kohen Hedyot. Okay. On top of him, Testament base. Okay, so the Gemara says Akol. Kol means everybody, lafuke rechaykim, even non-relatives. Meis lafuke kroivim. Meis comes to tell me even close relatives. And nafshais is lafuke revias dam shiyotzim shnei meisim shemetam v'ayel. Even if you have a measurement of blood from two people that died at the same time, that blood comes tamei b'ayel, and the Kohen Gadol is prohibited to become tamei even to that amount of blood. 1 second, just give me a second here. Okay. Anyway, yeah. Okay. Okay, there is a problem with what I said. Just Taisus brings in the problem, so I feel a little more comfortable. This is kind of difficult because the whole premise of the question that I asked you was that we know that a Kohen Gadol can't become tummy to relatives because he's no worse than a Kohen Hedyot, certainly to non-relatives. And even relatives probably are included under the rubric of the fact that he can't become tummy to his father and his mother. So why is Rabbi Akiva learning it out of the pasuk? There's no need to learn it out. It can be learned from. So Taisus has the question. Taisus says perhaps he holds you get malchus twice. In other words, if a Kohen Gadol becomes tummy to a non-relative, give him malchus twice, once for Kohen Gadol and once for Kohen Hedyot.
Oh,
So okay, that part of the Gemara is a little bit difficult. Okay.
just that part.
Yeah, it's if you look, it's a huge Taisus. Taisus has big Taisus. He's not convinced that the Gemara is so firm in exactly what's necessary in which psukim. Okay. Anyway, see the Mishnah. Al elu tumais. We're getting a new Gemara now. Okay. Al elu. So we're at the Mishnah on 49b. A Nazir cannot become tummy. What type of tumah we're referring to? Al elu tumas and Nazir megaleach. These types of tumas cause the Nazir to have to go through the purity process to become pure from these type of tumas. Al hames on a dead body, val kazayis min hames, or an olive-sized piece of flesh from a dead body. Val kazayis notzel. This is sort of a liquid that oozes out from the body after the person dies. If it measures an olive size, then it becomes tummy. Valmole tarvid rekev. Even if there was a sort of a spoonful of molds of flesh that was already begun to disintegrate, to break down. Al hatshedra on the spine, val gogolas on the skull, val avram and hames, and on a limb of a dead body. And again, presumably where there's no kazayas, because otherwise you become tummy because it's a kazayas. Kazayas means an olive size. Oh. So if you have a limb, even if it's a very small limb, you still become tummy. Val avram and achai. Similarly, a Nazir will also become tummy if a person who's alive lost a limb. Sheyesh al basar karoi, and there's flesh around that limb, and the limb is going to be buried because it can't be put back on together again. And a Nazir touches that, he becomes tummy, tumas meis, and he has to go through the whole process. Valchatzi kavat samais, on a measurement of bones. Valchatzi lugdam, on a two revius fulls of blood. That would be the 10 ounces, a little bit less. Valmagon, valmason, if you touch it, if you carry it. Val ahilon, if you make an oil on it, or you're in the same room as it. And making an oil means you step over it. Or you walk into a room that has one of these items inside. Val etzem kisaira, if you have a piece of a bone that's larger than a grain of barley. Okay. Well, etzem kisaira al magai val masoi. So if it's a larger piece of bone, then it becomes tummy ba'oil. But if it's a very small piece of bone, but it's larger than a grain of barley, then you become tummy magai masai, touching it or lifting it. But if you don't become tummy ba'oil, if you're in the same room as it, you don't become tummy with the bone unless it's half a kav. Okay. So in all these things, he has to get hazah of the paraduma, sprinkled with the ashes of the red heifer on the 3rd and 7th day. The Seiser Sakaidman, he loses the first count of Nazir, he has to restart his count. He only begins his count once he becomes tar and he brings a carbon. Okay, interesting story. The rabbis taught, after Rabbi Meir died, Amar lahen Rabbi Yehudah Talmidav. Rabbi Yehudah told the students, Al yichnasu Talmidei Rabbi Meir lakan. The students of Rabbi Meir should not enter. Why not? The students of Rabbi Meir are very excited to win arguments, and what? And they're not here to learn Torah. They're here just to show me how I'm wrong. So don't let them into the Beis Medrash. Okay. Dochak Simchas v'nichnas. So Simchas pushed his way in, and he entered the study hall anyway. Anyway, so sure enough, he raised his hand and he said, Amar Lahem, he wasn't embarrassed to say who he was. He says, Kach Shanali Reb Meir. This is what Reb Meir taught me. In other words, Rabbi Yehudah makes his proclamation. Simchas comes in and starts quoting Reb Meir. So it's very clear that he was a student of Reb Meir. The Mishnah reads, a Nazir becomes tamei to a dead body, and also to kazayas ben ames. Cause Rabbi Yehudah. So Rabbi Yehudah got very upset. For Amar Lahen, he says to his students, did I not tell you that Reb Meir's students should not enter, and they should confront him because they're looking to win arguments? What was wrong with what he said? If a Nazir becomes tamei and has to restart for even one kazayas from a dead body, certainly an entire dead body, he also becomes tamei too. So Yehuda's version of the Mishnah was that mace, a dead body, wasn't even in the Mishnah. It's obvious. Okay. So Amar Rabbi Yossi, so Rabbi Yossi responds, Yomru. In other words, I understand that Rabbi Yossi is responding to Rabbi Yehudah. I understand you're upset. But just recognize that by refusing to answer, you'll get the following statement, Yomru Meir Shachav, Meir passed away, and Rabbi Yehudah was kos. Yehudah got angry. And Yossi Shasak, and Yossi was silent. Torah Matahela. In other words, whether you like it or not, even if they're here to win arguments, you still need to answer them. And therefore, it's not appropriate to just close the door or to be upset about it. You have ultimately you need to answer. Person, if you engage in behavior, even if the person against you is sort of vindictive and wants to win, there's still an obligation to answer. And ultimately, you didn't answer the question, so answer it. So Rav Yossi is pointing out that it is necessary for the Mishnah to say mace. Why? It's necessary to tell me if you have a deceased body that doesn't even have a kazayas of flesh on it. So the Gemara says, hold on a second. It doesn't answer the question because we know that even one limb you become tamei to. So the Gemara says, if even on one limb a Nazir becomes tamei and has to purify himself, so then on the whole body for sure he has to. Okay, so that doesn't really work as an answer. We're talking about a scenario of a miscarriage, very early miscarriage, where, so to speak, the limbs haven't been tied together with sinews. So it's a very early miscarriage, and there's just these limbs, but they're not really bound together. Okay, and in that scenario, the Mishnah is telling me that you become tamei to the body, even though it doesn't have necessarily a full organ, full limb, or it doesn't have a full, or it doesn't even have a certain amount of flesh on it. Yeah. Okay. Another possibility of why this would be necessary to be in the Mishnah. We're talking about a situation where the body isn't complete. It's a situation where you do not have most of the bones, but you have either you have most of the limbs without most of the bones. I'm sorry, 1 second. No, Revat Samas is Revat Kaf. Hold on a second. So Rav is saying even if we're talking about a situation of a person who died where you have either most of the bones or 1 second, or most of the frame of the body, even if it's not majority of the bones. And it's a situation where there isn't a kazayas of flesh, and there isn't either a measurement of bones. In other words, it's obviously a small corpse, and there isn't a roiv hakav of bones. So therefore, it goes under the rubric of mace. It's considered a full deceased body because it's a majority. Either again because it's a majority of the frame of the person, even though it's not a majority of the bones, or it's a majority of the bones. I don't know how many bones a person has. Whatever it is, it's 100 bones. Yes, there are 51 bones. Whatever it is. So in either situation, that because it's a majority of a body, it's called a deceased body, even though it doesn't have a measurement of bones or a measurement of flesh. Okay, stop here. It's a shorter though.
I hope I forget about all this when you practice.